here, three things are true. One, you know you have emotional triggers. Two, you've tried to work on them. Three, you haven't been able to successfully resolve them, which is what has brought you here to see how to resolve them. That's exactly what I'm going to share in this video. My name is Shubhali. I'm an inner work guide, working and living at the nexus of therapeutic modalities, coaching, and spirituality. This topic of resolving emotional triggers is very, very close to my heart, not just because I work with people in helping them resolve their emotional triggers, but also because I continually do my own work with my emotional triggers. If emotional wisdom, relational healing, mental clarity, and living an authentically aligned life are things you're interested in, subscribe to the channel, because that's exactly what I talk about. That's exactly what I work on with myself and with my clients. Now, before we step into how to resolve your emotional triggers, you need to understand what is exactly an emotional trigger so that you understand why and how to do the steps. Emotional triggers are slightly complex, so there are layers to it. But for the purposes of this video, to just resolve in the moment emotional triggers, we don't need to go into the layers. We just need to understand in a general sense what is really happening when we are experiencing an emotional trigger. Something happens in the environment outside, in my world outside, and it creates a sense of discomfort in my body. And when this discomfort is created in my body, along with that discomfort, there's an emotion that I feel. And that emotion that I feel, my brain perceives it in a certain way. And usually the certain way is as if it's a threat. And so this is what is happening. The event happens, mind, body, emotions, uncomfortable emotion, uncomfortable sensations, mind thinking, threat, threat, threat. Right? When these three things happen together, you react to that trigger. The reason it's important to understand this process is so that you now understand why I'm going to be sharing the steps that I'm going to be sharing, and so that you have some conviction as to why you want to be doing those steps. All right, so we said three things are happening in the world inside when in the world outside there is a trigger. Three things. I'm feeling a certain uncomfortable emotion, my body is going through uncomfortable sensations, and my mind is thinking threat, threat, threat. My mind is thinking threat because it is sensing that the body is in discomfort. So the first step is to soothe my body. In other words, to down-regulate my nervous system. Anytime that you're feeling discomfort or uncomfortable or in emotional, or you're in an emotional trigger, notice your body has either become tight or has become rigid or is feeling antsy, right? So something is happening in the body that kind of dysregulates the body. So our first step is to regulate the body. Number of ways to do it. The simplest is the breath. So the first step, that the moment you feel an emotional trigger, you breathe. And how do you breathe? You become conscious of the next in-breath, and you consciously take a deep in-breath right to your belly, letting the belly expand, and then the exhale, if possible, through the mouth with a sound like this. Deep belly breath, exhale from the mouth. 2 to 3 deep breaths. Let's say you can't do this entire breath because the situation is such that you can't be like, what do you do then? You do the same thing, just silently. So like this. Right? So you're not, of course, you're not doing this with the hand. That was just to show you. But all that you do is become consciously aware that you're breathing in and you're letting the breath be deep and long. And then when you breathe out, you let it be slow and gentle and breathe out. Yeah. So the first thing, we need to calm the body down. To calm the body down, breath is the easiest way out. That's step one. Once you have done this, if the intensity of trigger has gone down, Yeah, so we'll do it two ways. We'll first talk about if this brings down the intensity of trigger, then what are the next steps, and then we'll talk about if the intensity of trigger is still high, then what to do. So let's say you notice the trigger, you do your breath, 2 to 3 breath practices, the trigger intensity goes down. That's step 1 done. Then step 2 is to just for a moment check in. Okay, how do I want to be in this situation? And I can check in with myself and say, okay, I can, now that I have regulated my body, I feel okay. So I can actually engage in this, whatever is happening. Or I see, actually, I want to draw a boundary here. And I want to say, hey, you know what? I don't want to talk about this anymore. Or I want to say, hey, you know what? I did not appreciate that tone. Or I want to say, hey, you know what? Let's take like a 10-minute breather, right? So step 1 was regulating through the breath. If the trigger intensity went down, step 2 was checking in. Do I want to engage, and in what way? Yeah. So I want to draw a boundary. I want to continue engaging. I want to take like a 10-minute breather, 5-minute breather, whatever. My trigger is resolved in that moment. Now let's come to the second bit where we say that I did my breathing, but the intensity of the trigger is still high. The best thing you can do in that moment, get up, move away. Physically separate yourself from the emotional trigger. That is the best solution in the moment. Remember, I'm taking you through the different steps, the different strategies for the moment. Later, I'll also talk about like what are the long-term things to do with emotional triggers, right? But this is in the moment what do I do with triggers. The first step is always going to be the breath. After that, second step will depend on whether I feel that the trigger is now reduced. I can engage, draw my boundary, do whatever, and or I realize that the trigger is still, the intensity is still high. I must physically move out of the space. And if you need something to motivate you to, why should I physically move out of the space? Because I know from my experience, and when I'm saying I know, this is for you, yeah? Each of us knows from our own experiences that actually after the trigger, we get back to saying, hey, that wasn't the best self. That isn't how I want to be. That isn't who I am, or that isn't who I want to be, right? So there is a sense of regret. Thus, I want to physically move away from the trigger if possible. Okay, now let's say that you've done step 1, done the breathing. You realize that the trigger, the intensity is still high. You think about the second step, which is physically leaving the space, but you realize that that's not possible. Let's say, you're in a family situation, family gathering, something or the other, and that's just not possible. Then what is the third way out? If you're in a group space, try and use some form of distraction, which means that in that moment of trigger, see if you can start engaging with somebody else or something else. If it's a one-on-one conversation, then you might actually want to just say, look, if we continue this conversation, I will react in a way that is not going to be best for either of us, right? So you actually state it out. If that's also not possible, if nothing else is possible, you then try to resort back to step 1, which is continue to focus on your breathing. If even then the other person continues to engage and continues to do what they're doing, and there is no other way out, and there is nothing else you can do, then hold a lot of gentle grace for yourself, because you have tried everything possible, and it is most likely what's going to happen is that you will react. The issue so much is not with the reaction. The issue usually is that I look back at it and I regret, and I feel like that wasn't the best me, that is not how I want to be. Which is what then takes us to long-term work, number 1. Number 2, I can also get back after having gotten triggered and reacted to my trigger, right? So later, once I'm more grounded in a more settled space, I can get back to this person and say, hey, I did not appreciate what was happening. And it didn't land well with me. It made me feel, XYZ. However, I apologize for the way I reacted. I don't think that was the best way, and I would not want to be that person. So I'm sorry for the way I reacted. The best thing to do in terms of resolving emotional triggers is to own them. The more I can own my triggers, in fact, the more I can own any and all of my shit, the faster that shit turns into manure. Yeah. Now, just to bit around, because this is not the video for that, there'll be another video that'll talk more in depth about long-term work with emotional triggers, but just sort of a hint towards it, just a guiding light towards it. These are in the moment strategies, right? You can do all of these strategies. They'll work. At times they'll work, at times they'll not work. When they don't work, holding that grace, holding that gentleness for yourself, and then coming back to the person, owning your stuff. Never own their stuff, never minimize what they did. Always let them know how their actions impacted you, and own up your stuff. So these strategies will work in the moment for short term, which is important. This is also important work, right? In the moment, what do I do? It's important. What is equally important is what am I doing in the long term? So as I mentioned at the beginning, these emotional struggles are complex. There are layers to them. And so I want to sit down with myself and look at what about this event creates this trigger for me, right? And I want to understand through different modalities, a few modalities that have really worked well for me and the people that I work with. Paths work. So inner family system, internal family system, inner child work. These frameworks really help me sort of open up my inner world and see what's really happening for whom. There are several parts in my inner world, right? And one of these parts is stuck, wounded, hurt, and stuck in a moment of the past. And that person, that part is what gets triggered in the event here. So that's the kind of work I want to do. I want to build practices, cultivate the kind of tools and strategies that help me to go and see what's happening here. Once I see what's happening here, I work with these parts. I help them resolve their hurt, their wound. Then in the moment of present day trigger, that trigger, it'll still be there, but the intensity will start reducing. And then the more and more I do this long-term work, the more and more the intensity of this will keep reducing, until one day it vanishes. I hope this was helpful. To conclude the entire framework, remember, step 1 is always going to be the same. Regulate yourself through the breath. After you've regulated, step 2 will depend on what's happening. So if the trigger intensity has gone down, you can decide to now engage or draw a boundary, whatever you want. If not, then either physically move away. If physically moving away is not a possibility, then see if somehow you can distract yourself. If distraction is also not a possibility, then it's fine. You will react in that moment. Hold a lot of grace and gentleness for yourself. And once the trigger has happened, whatever has to happen has happened, the event has taken place. Once you're in a better space, more regulated, come back, own your stuff, let them know how their action impacted you, and own your stuff. Yeah. And then support this two-step strategy with long-term, deeper inner work. If you've been exploring your inner world for a while, looking at your root emotional, relational, mindset issues, I'd love to see if I can support you. Book your inner work strategy call with me. The link is down below in the description. And like the video if you like the content. Let me know in the comments below how it landed with you, what you're taking away, what made sense, what was confusing, everything. I would love to hear from you. Also, you might like this video next on dissolving the inner critique, the many unhealthy voices inside. Come back again, same space, same place, same channel. Until then, much love to all of you. Mwah.